Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have you most scariest part of the video.
Night shift workers of Reddit, what are some creepy things you've experienced in the middle of the night? Used to work late shift as classroom IT support for a college. We didn't get a lot of high priority calls from night classes, so, among other duties, we'd get a lot of repairs and maintenance done that couldn't be done when the classrooms were in use during the day. I don't mind the dark, so I wasn't in the habit of turning lights in classrooms on if I was just going to do something really quick on the computer. Well, I had a ticket to install something on the instructor PC in a classroom I had never been to before. It's about 10 p.m. when I get around to this ticket and I head into the room. I get about halfway across the room and suddenly freeze. The hair on the back of my neck is standing up and I feel 100% that I'm being watched. No, I'm surrounded. Then as my eyes start to adjust, I see them. This entire classroom is encircled by hospital beds sticking out from the walls. And in every bed there's a person sitting up, looking right at me. I'm sorry, I blurt out. Before finally realizing that they're all just plastic dummies and I was in a nursing classroom. I work at a cafe downtown. Quite a few homeless shelters in range, and a huge drug problem. One day I'm working behind the bar, and this redhead kid, probably in his early 20s, sits down in our seating area and starts chanting under his breath. After a minute or two he starts moving his hands around like he's casting a spell. He then gets up, starts yelling and disturbing everyone. I walk over to him and tell him he needs to leave for the day. Man looks me straight in the eye and says this is all a giant game. I'll kill you with one finger. At this point, whatever. I get death threats a lot down here, not important. Shoo him on his way and that's that. Fast forward to when we're closing up, around 9 p.m., not technically night shift, but it gets dark up here, so it counts. I lock the doors, and start heading to the parking garage my car is in. It's probably about 6 blocks away, no big deal. Winter up here is insanely dark. So, it's already pretty creepy downtown. About a block or two of walking and I hear this hissing noise. I freaked out because I couldn't see anyone around. I pick up the pace a bit, then I hear hurried footsteps in the snow behind me. I booked it to the staircase for the garage because I wasn't going to wait for the elevator. I'm about a staircase up and I hear the door I just went through slam shut. I finally made it to my car to get in as fast as possible. I look around, and lo and behold, there's the redhead from earlier. Only this time he's furious. He sees me in my car and books at full speed and starts hitting my window screaming, "I'm going to kill you." I door checked him and drove it away. Called the police officers the next morning and they found the man. Apparently he thinks he's in the Illuminati and completely corroborated my story to the police. Small jail time and 1 restraining order later, never seen him again. Shit like this happens a lot. I got chased to my car by a crazy redhead wizard in the Illuminati because I told him he had to calm down and leave for the day. I used to work at a pub that was 2 miles from my house. My shift ended at about 11 one night. I stayed there for a couple of drinks, then started walking home. Now this had been an exceptional night for me tip-wise, and I had close to $400 in cash on me at the time. Between the pub and my house was exactly 1 streetlight about a quarter mile from the pub. The rest of the walk was in complete darkness. This was a dark night too. It was close to the new moon, and cloudy to boot, so it was almost pitch black. Now I live out in the boonies, so there isn't even much light pollution to help out. Not long after I left the pub, a car slowly drove by me. About a quarter mile down the road the car slows to a stop, and it just sits there. I stopped walking and watched the car. It sits for a few minutes, then slowly drives away. A couple of minutes later the same car comes slowly driving back by me in the opposite lane. It gets by me, drives a bit down the road, and slows to a stop again. Then it does a U-turn and starts creeping back down the road towards me with the lights off. At this point I'm terrified. I didn't have a cell phone at the time, there's no one around to see what's going on. The car is between me and the pub, so I can't get back to safety there. My house is still about 1.5 miles away, no way I can quickly escape there. I quickly ran off the road into the woods and ducked down behind a bush. I watch for the car, but it's too dark to see it with the lights off and bushes/trees/undergrowth between me and the road. I sit there for about 10 minutes, but don't see/hear anything. I'm about to make my way back to the road when I hear car doors closing. Now I'm really panicking. It feels like my chest is about to explode. The hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. I keep imagining someone sneaking up behind me. I stay hidden and hope to God whoever it is doesn't find me. I don't know how long I will stay there, but I eventually hear car doors again, then cars passing by. I give it a couple of minutes, then ease back to the road. When I see it's clear, I haul ass back to the pub and let my boss know what happened. He said at once that I'm never to walk home at night again, either he, his brother, or his mom will give me a lift home. When the other servers and the kitchen staff hear what happened, they all say the same thing. Never been that terrified before. I worked at Walmart overnight for a while. Every single Friday night without fail this old woman with 2 children would come in at around 10 to 11. She was obnoxiously loud as she shopped. She grabbed a bunch of different things and stuffed it all in her cart, a few times asking one of our employees to help her grab something. Every Friday night it was the same thing. Her talking voice was her yelling and stayed in the store sometimes until 5 a.m. I worked 10 to 7. She grabbed a cart full of stuff which seemed like it was from every section of the store. She would do this with her 2 girls, and the weirdest part wasn't even that. It was the fact that she would leave her cart somewhere and walk out with nothing. Spent hours in the store grabbing a bunch of things with her 2 kids and walked out without anything every Friday. I never figured out why. It's not creepy scary, it's creepy or weird. There was also a creepy sad time where this woman was shopping, and she was obviously ducked up on drugs. Her face showed it, she was basically unresponsive to anyone and anything as she walked through the store. I only saw her once walking by with her kid. He was about 7 saying things like, "Hey, can you hear me? It's me. Why aren't you talking to me?" stuff like that. Really sad. But yes, those are my overnight stories. I don't work there anymore. I work in the emergency room, and I frequently work overnight shifts. One night I was sitting at the front desk by myself, and I heard the front doors open but nobody walked in. So, I get up to go see what is going on or if anyone needs help. I go into the vestibule as it's empty and I want to see if anyone is outside. Nobody is there, not even any vehicles. At this point I shrug it off, but then I look down and see a massive pool of blood, like trauma level 1 massive. I immediately called the nurses to come up and we all scouted out the area. We didn't find anyone, and to this day I wonder if that person survived. Just wish I could have helped. Very creepy experience. I used to work overnight phone support for enterprise customers. Specifically, those in a PACE. Frankly, our market segment there was very, very small. On average each person working gets 3 to 5 calls a week. The office building, we used to be a shipping receiving warehouse, had horrendous sodium vapor halogens. So, we petitioned to have the lights turned out at night. This one evening I was watching Frailty with headphones while waiting for my next call. I remember it being a very tense moment in the movie, and I heard a growling over my shoulder. I quickly checked nothing there, chalked it up to the movie. A couple of minutes later, I heard the growling again. It's not a dog, it's not the movie. I tapped one of my coworkers to ask if they heard it too. He does, so we start searching. I end up at the far corner of the cubicle farm area and I hear the growling again, and it's right behind me. I turn around and there's nothing there. The growling is right in front of me. I peek into the large manager's cube and there's the growling. It was the security guard asleep under the desk. This jackass picked the only section of the building that had people staffed overnight and the only section that required badged entry. The next morning on my way out of the building, I told the security guard that there were some odd noises coming from a manager's cube. He went pale and said, "I'll have to add that to my report." I used to work night shift as a guard in a prison. One night, I found a knife just laying out in the open in the dark, empty kitchen. This is really bad because it means that about 2 safety checkpoints have been missing. All the sharps are supposed to be locked up and counted at the end of the inmate's shift. And the assumption is that it might have been deliberate. You know, a weapon left out for someone to attack someone else. It was pretty creepy, seeing that lone knife laying on the counter in the dark kitchen, everything else perfectly clean. My head was on a pretty dramatic swivel until I got to the captain's office. Also, in the middle of the night, I'd have to walk around the building a few times. Did you know raccoons will growl at you from the bushes even though you can't see them? I sure didn't. When I came inside, wide-eyed, saying, "I think I heard growling in the bushes." Am I nuts? They were all, "Oh, that's the raccoons." I work night shifts at a gas station. During the weekdays it's pretty quiet, it's usually only the truckers and taxi drivers who pop by for coffee and the sandwiches we have. But one night I was talking with one of the cab drivers, a car drives into the lot, parks, and it sits with its floodlights on bright aimed towards the glass front. Kinda weird, but maybe the guy forgot what light he got on, it happens. The guy finally enters after maybe 5 minutes of flooding the store park with light, and it's obvious he's on something. He's jittery, wide-eyed, looks disheveled, paces around before he buys a coffee and stares intensely at me throughout the purchase. Worth mentioning, I'm a 5 feet 2 inches chick with the opposite of a resting bitch face. I smile friendly to everyone. But I work alone for 8 hours in the dead of night. Eerie guy pays for his coffee without a single word. Despite my friendly chattiness, so I continue talking with the cab driver, but I still feel this guy staring at me. It was very intense and unsettling. Cab guy probably notices this and leans on the counter and slides his card over, talking a bit hushed that I should call when I get off work if that guy sticks around, because he's getting creepy vibes from him. The cab guy was right. This guy stuck around the shop for about an hour till closing, staring at me clean up. Until some truckers arrived, then he left and sat in his car, parked up against the window staring until closing time. I called the cab guy, and he gave me a free ride home. He later told me this weirdo had been driving behind his taxi with his lights on full power. The whole thing was just creepy. Formatting is probably a bit wonky, I apologize. Not exactly night shift, but as a bartender I'm usually heading home around 2 to 4 a.m. On a slow Monday night, we were about to close the restaurant when a seemingly homeless woman walked into the bar. Working in a city, we're used to vagrants making their way into the bar, so kicking her out would be easy. My manager yelled to her, "Hey, sorry. We're closing up. We won't be able to serve you. You'll have to leave." She kept walking slowly and silently toward the bar, staring straight ahead with a blank face. As she walked closer, we realized she looked unusual for a homeless woman. Her skin was gray. I'd never seen a skin color like hers in my life. It wasn't dirty or old or tanned. It was an exceptionally light gray that was tight with almost no wrinkles. She also had a tattoo of 4 lines on her face. They all started at one point in the center of her chin, then continued down her neck in a ray-like pattern. She also had no shoes on. Once she reached the bar, she went to pull out a chair when my manager yelled again, "Hey! We're closing up. Also, you can't be in here without shoes on. You need to leave now." She continued to sit down, then turned her head slowly to me. Locking eyes with me, she said, "I like you." At this point, my finger was on the bar panic button. Most bars have them so they can get immediate police response. Our bouncer finally made his way over and put his hand on her shoulder to ask her to leave. The minute he touched her, she broke out into this extremely loud, high-pitched, manic scream. It was like a scream out of a horror movie. What made it creepier, the whole time she was screaming she was looking at me dead in the eye without blinking. She wasn't moving, so my bouncer went to forcibly remove her from the bar. I pushed the panic button and watched my bouncer pull away this woman as she was screaming uncontrollably, all while staring straight at me. The police came fairly quickly and took the woman away. To this day, that is still the creepiest night I've ever had at work. Used to work night shift at Toys R Us. At night they would turn half of the lights off to save on power, and the girls' toy section. Oh God, the girls' toy section at night was so creepy. You're carrying a box down the aisle and it's perfectly silent, then the motion sensors on the dolls will catch your movement and all at once the toys will turn and follow you with their lifeless eyes before screaming or laughing or crying in that horrible electronic box way and flailing about. I am a fully grown, 6 feet 4 inches, 300 pounds hairy man, and I have never noped my way out as fast as getting away from that section at night. When I was in Afghanistan, we were in the mountains right on the Pakistani border. The first few months of the deployment were pretty hairy, but as soon as winter rolled around and the fighting season dried up, things got really quiet. Night shift went from when are we gonna get hit to what kind of weird shit am I gonna witness tonight. I think it was February or so, and I was out on guard in the north-facing machine gun shack. We all had night vision devices, nods, so since it was pitch black, we always wore them on night shifts. Well, I was looking out into the mountains when I see what looks like a man come crawling out from behind a boulder up the hill about 100 meters. Being February, we hadn't gotten hit in almost a month because there was 2 feet of snow on the ground and the temperatures were hovering right around zero, so the Taliban chucked deuces back to Pakistan and left us alone for the cold months. Now, this man was on all fours, like an animal. Just sitting there, half behind a boulder, seemingly staring into my soul. So, I pointed the machine gun at him and turned on the visible laser. Put the laser right on his nose, didn't get a reaction. Nothing. Man, just stared at me. So, at this point, I'm getting a little freaked out. I'd been blown up, shot at, almost RPG'd, and now some local is playing games. I radioed into our TOC Tactical Operations Center that there was an unarmed local staring at me on the north post, and I either wanted someone to clear me to wax him or come out and look at what I was seeing. E5 on the radio tells me he's sending a private out to babysit me. Man comes out, looks up at the hill at this man. Goes back to the TOC and tells the E5 that there really was a man just staring at us out on the mountain. So, the E5 comes up to the shack and I point this man out. I spare you not, as soon as the E5 gets eyes on the local, the man jumps up, hops up on the boulder and starts screaming like somebody just dipped him in boiling water. Guard tower at the east corner can now also see the guy, and as soon as the crazy local started howling, East Shack loosed about a 30-round burst of 7.62 out over his head. That is loud when it's dead quiet. Crazy guy jumps off the rock and runs down the mountain screaming the whole way. Dead quiet the rest of the night, but the commander upped security to 50%, meaning half the dudes on our outpost had to pull security the rest of the night. The running joke for the rest of the winter was to be on the lookout for the mind control experiment that the CIA lost track of. Freaked me out. Good for a story though. I'm an IT guy who frequently works overnight when no one else is in the building. We have a white noise machine installed in the building that keeps the voices of all of the cubicle dwellers from blending together into a manning noise. In an empty building though, it sounds exactly like someone whispering into your ear just soft enough that you can't make out the words. Figuring out how to turn that off was a high priority.
I worked at a nightclub as a hostess. This isn't creepy, but pretty terrifying. I had a tip jar in front of my desk. It was a Saturday night, so the tip jar was looking nice. Well, this man comes up and starts talking to me. Apparently, while he was talking, he nudged the tip jar behind my computer screen, so I couldn't see him steal $120. I only noticed when he walked away and back into the club. So, when I did notice, I told security, who checked the cameras, saw him do it, chased him down, and forced him to give me my money back. Then as they were dragging him out, he looked at me with this crazy look in his eyes saying he was gonna wait outside for me to rape me/shoot me. It's safe to say I had all of the security guards walk me to my car that night. This isn't fair because I work night shift in a psych facility. Basically, I've seen a lot of things working at night. From people coming in high and psychotic, to people huddling naked in the corner of a room whispering. The scariest thing I have ever seen was a patient coming out of the nurse's station and saying someone was outside of their window looking in. From admission, they had been experiencing pretty strong hallucinations, so we assumed this was another one. To provide some ease, we went into the room to verify that there was no one there and provide them with some relief and comfort. We have removable draw curtains in rooms, and they were shut. Walked up to it and asked if it was this window. Patients told us that it was. Drew it open and had quite possibly the biggest scare of my life. There was somebody there wide-eyed and staring right back at us through the window. He ran off when we saw him, and we ended up calling the police as well as security. They never found the guy, and we never saw him again. Still creeps me out to this day. Edit, patient with history of hallucinations saw someone out of their window. Went to check, there was someone outside of their window. Not my story, but my father's. He was a paramedic and got called out one night to pick up a guy who was found dead in his truck. Man was apparently there a while, because rigor mortis set in. To make things creepier, it was apparently in a larger thunderstorm. They get the man out and manage to straighten all the limbs out well enough to put the dead guy on the stretcher. It was like 3 a.m. and the mortician couldn't get into the morgue until 4. They opt to drive around waiting instead of posting up at the station. About 15 minutes into the driving, the man apparently sits straight up and lets out a large moan. Man was still dead, but scares everyone. Later my dad figured out when you straighten out a regorged body gases shift and cause weird things. 2 stories. First one is one that my mom told me that sounds sort of like it might be an urban legend, so I don't know if it actually happened. Apparently, a distant cousin was training to be a mortician and had just inserted some sort of shunt into a vital area of a body were that body not already dead when the body sat straight up like you described. Distant cousin freaked out, thinking the guy was still alive and that he had just mortally wounded the guy. Spent the rest of his life in a psych ward. For some reason, this just strikes me as a friend of a friend of a friend story, but I haven't heard it anywhere else, so maybe it really did happen to my family member. Second story, a friend as an actual person I know and not someone I've been told about, so I'm sure it's legit, was in mortuary school. Friends are very short. The table the body was on was a bit too tall for her to get good leverage when she was inserting something into the body. She told me what it was, but I can't remember. She raised her leg and braced her knee against some part of the table to get better leverage and let out a truly righteous fart. In front of her instructor and her entire class. She and the other students just kind of paused, and the instructor said, "Oh, don't worry, dead bodies fart all the time. It's nothing unusual." I can't believe she passed her fart off as the dead guy's. My brother moved in with me a few months ago and got a job doing night shift custodial work at a nearby high school. His workday starts at 10 p.m., and fortunately for him, it's close enough to walk, because he gets off shift about 20 minutes after I have to leave for work in the morning, and he doesn't have a car. One night, a little after midnight, he calls me in a panic asking me to come down and pick him up, because there's some kind of weird shit happening, his exact words, and there's no way he's sticking around by himself. My brother isn't the sort to freak out over nothing, so I hop in the car, in my jammies, and head down to the high school. A little background is needed here. As children, my brother was apparently sensitive. He often talked about various seemingly supernatural encounters. In one old house we lived in, he told our parents that a man would come to his room at night and tell him bedtime stories. It wasn't until we were grown up that our father told us that a distant relative had committed suicide in the same room that was my brother's bedroom, years before either of us was born, and that my brother's description of the man matched the deceased relative. I'm the exact opposite. Nothing creepy or supernatural ever happens to me or around me. If it happened there before, it doesn't happen when I'm there, and often doesn't return after I leave. I've had enough perplexed people tell me that their ghost went away after I visited their house, or that a particular place stopped being creepy after I was there, or had someone acting crazy calm down when I talked to them, to be quite sure that I'm some kind of natural repellent for creepy. So, I get to the high school, and my brother is standing by the front doors. He runs over to the car and tells me that I have to come and make it stop. It was the sound of lockers opening and closing just out of sight. He would turn a corner of a hallway and hear a locker open and slam closed behind him, or around the corner of the next hallway. We go into the school, my brother practically hanging on my arm, which probably looked hilarious, as I'm shorter and plump, and he's tall and super skinny, like a modern version of Laurel and Hardy. We walked up and down all the halls. Nothing happens. No sounds, no movement, no lockers opening or closing. No cold spots, no inexplicable drafts, no creepy noises, or feelings. We walk down the last hallway, at which point it gets on for 1 a.m. and I'm tired and just want to go back home. There's one locker standing ajar, and as we approach it, my brother reaches out to close it, pulls his hand back, and says, "You do it." I closed the locker. Nothing happens. Finally, my brother says I can go, as long as I promise to come back the next night if there are any more problems. A week later, he comes home and hands me a thank you note and a $50 Amazon gift card from the head of the custodial department for services rendered. Easiest $50 I've ever made. It hit crunch time towards the end of a project, and there were a lot of people in the building I work in just chugging away to their deadlines, commonly until 5 to 6 a.m. So not night shift, but close enough. Anyways, it hits 4:45 a.m. and I decide to head off home for some sleep, to then come back in for 10 a.m. Say bye to some friends, and promptly begin to head back home, which is barely a 15-minute walk away. As I walk across the car park, I spot a guy walking on the pavement way on the opposite side dressed in a full black tracksuit with his hood up and cap down, naturally just a suspicious guy, and me being kinda small, I keep my eye on him. I hit just towards the other two buildings on my work site, and I hear him shouting, turn my head to look and he's clearly aiming it at me very hostile, but unable to make out the words. I picked up the pace walking between these buildings, and decided to look back over my shoulder. There he was, arms up in the air walking menacingly towards me in the center of the road. Now I should add here, the car park we have is very big and there would have been no way the guy would have crossed it in the minute or two it took for me to be where I was without running. This guy was definitely out to terrorize me. I've never been stalked in my life, and at this point, a dry fear came over me. Immediately, I worked out my options: run, walk to the student dorms in view, and pretend to be a student locked out. Keep walking home. Go back to my work building. I pretty much decided all of these were moot, as I didn't want to get chased at close to 5 a.m., be trapped outside a building with a guy who could easily catch up to me as I stood pretending, or let the guy know where I lived, especially since there were a lot of dark places I could just see myself be dragged down by the guy. Finally, going back to my workplace, to avoid turning my back on myself and him, I'd have to walk down an even darker alleyway, which I don't like doing during the day, let alone night. So, I just kept walking, picking up my pace, not enough to be obvious, but enough for me to make some distance between us. Walked past the dorms, turned onto the main road where there were street lights, and immediately took out my phone to ring one of my coworkers. I literally blew up his phone as I kept my other hand in my pocket but wrapped around my keys so if it turned nasty, I would have a weapon to do some small damage. Thankfully after 6 times, the coworker picked up and immediately ran out to where I was, staying on the phone with me. I ended up dashing into the first takeaway place that was open and just stood waiting for my coworker to appear. The guy never followed me down the turn I took to get to said takeaway. He must have just carried on walking. I walked home, and whilst I was a little nervous walking home late at night afterwards, I'm not afraid of doing it again. Just a little more cautious now, and often tell someone when I'm about to head off that I'll message them when I get home. Nothing bad happened since, and that was close to 2 months ago now. I used to work the overnight shift at a group home for children. It was a creepy old Victorian house, and it certainly had a history as a couple of children had passed away there over the 50 years it was open. One night, around 3 a.m., all of a sudden a tissue box went flying off of the TV in the staff room, no apparent cause. I sat there shaking for a minute and then thought to go check on the kid in the room on the other side of the wall. As I went to the door, the kid fell out of bed all of a sudden and immediately woke up. He looked at me and said, "Did you see it? That's what's been getting me. The dark thing." I didn't work too many overnights after that. I finished working a retail shift at 3 a.m. I was walking home, as I usually did. I only lived 20 minutes away, and saw what I thought was a pile of ripped bags in the middle of the road. Turns out it was a woman who was passed out drunk. Legit thought I was gonna get jumped or worse than that, but I managed to get her conscious and carried her home, cleaned her up, She had cuts and gashes from where she fell, and made sure she'd sobered up before I left. Meant I needed to walk another 20 minutes in the other direction, didn't get home until 2 hours after my shift either, around 5 a.m., but I couldn't just leave someone lying there in the middle of the road with anything potentially happening, whether it be her own doing or someone being irresponsible, not paying attention driving, etc. I used to work overnight at a hotel. Usually, most of the stuff I dealt with was gross, not scary. But, one night right around Christmas I was filing papers, alone, at the front desk. The automatic doors opened, but nobody came through. The doors closed, and about 20 seconds later, all the ornaments on the lobby Christmas tree were swinging, like a gust of wind blew through them. That scared me because I was standing about 10 feet from the tree, and there was absolutely no wind that night. After the other ornaments had stopped, this one candy cane ornament near the bottom of the kept swinging very quickly for 45 minutes. I went over to see if there was a draft or something, but as soon as I got behind the counter, it stopped cold. My coworker was present for the swinging and the cold stop, and the rest of the night we didn't do anything else alone.
About 10 years ago I was an apprentice for a plumber that was contracted with a popular fitness chain. One night I was doing pool maintenance alone, like literally the only one in the entire building. Generally, I would shock the water with liquid bromine and throw a pool floater with a chlorine tablet in it. Well, this particular night I was out of liquid bromine, so I grabbed a solid bromine tablet and a pool floater. I carved away at the tablet with a knife so it would fit. They are purposely shaped to not fit for reasons I'll explain later. I then had the idea to jam a chlorine tablet on top of it to save me the time of prepping another floater and fishing it out later. I chucked the thing into the pool and head off to change a membrane in a leaky bathroom sink. As I'm unscrewing the faucet I hear a high-pitched scream. It sounds like a child is screaming their lungs out. It's coming from the pool room. I'm frantic. I start running towards it thinking I'm going to save a child. As I'm about to round the corner the scream turns into a very low-pitched hum almost demonic in nature. I stop. WTF is all I'm thinking. I peek around the corner and bang, the pool floater explodes. Turns out you can't mix bromine and chlorine in their dry forms. The scream was the pressure buildup escaping out of one of the pool floater's holes, and I assume the change in pitch was from it melting. I ended up needing a respirator in order to go fish out the pool floater and open all of the doors. My 1-hour job turned into an 8-hour nightmare.
I worked in a mental health hospital for over 3 years. Lots of creepy stuff occurred. One incident though was a lady who had pseudo-exorcisms, as we called them. She had multiple personalities, and one night she screamed at the top of her lungs for hours, until her vocal cords started to give out and she coughed up blood. Then, she smeared the blood everywhere and wrote things in it. Worked overnight changing grocery store prices. We were all convinced the place was haunted. Those big, heavy, swinging doors to the back would literally open all the way and nobody was there. Cans and other products would fly off the shelves. Like Scoot, then go all the way to the other side of the aisle before hitting the ground. On my second day, I was working in the freezer ice cream section and heard a triple knock from the back. Decided to answer back. I knocked twice. The knocking continued for a while and followed me down the doors. I found out later that there is no access back there. It's a solid wall. And the one that made me jumpy if I was alone was when I went to catch a frog that had gotten inside. It went underneath a shelf, so I got on my knees and without looking, because I'd seen him right at the edge, I was feeling around for it. And something grabbed my hand. I screamed as loud as I could, sprang backwards on my butt, knocked stuff off the shelf behind me, and ran out the door. One of the managers ran after me and asked what happened. I told her. She goes, "Oh. Yes. That happens here sometimes. Nobody has been hurt though." I then stopped forward so my feet were away from the shelves. That was a very terrifying place. Worked night shift at an amusement park. I was working during the winter, while the park was closed for the season, and I was one of 2 people in the entire park and the other was right next to me. We were driving around, and the phone started ringing like every ride and in every building we drove by. And I don't mean all at the same time either. But it was like the ringing phone. Creepy as hell.
I'm an aircraft maintainer in the Air Force, and I have been on night shift pretty much my whole career. There is a form of servicing we have to do on the aircraft called loxing, which is where you service the aircraft with liquid oxygen for the pilots. This job is dangerous, so you are the only one allowed in the vicinity of the plane, and you're wearing a bunch of gear. I had to do a LOX job on the other side of the ramp from everyone else. Essentially away from everyone. I finished my LOX job and hopped on the aircraft to take down the numbers for our forms. In the process of me putting power on, I heard this horrific PS happen from what felt like every corner of the plane. When you're alone in the dark in a large dark plane, all you really can do is panic. Turns out the shutoff valve where I was servicing had frozen itself open and had proceeded to spray liquid oxygen everywhere. So not only did I have to change my pants, but I also had to redo the job.
I've always worked as a night nurse and have seen some creepy things. One night, I had a patient die unexpectedly in their room. I found her while she was gasping for her last breath and quickly called the code team to intervene and get her to the ICU. She did not make it. But shortly after, the patient call light in her now empty room kept going off frequently. I would answer the call light, go into the room to try and troubleshoot what was setting it off, but never find anything amiss. Finally, after like the 10th time it went off in an hour, I answered the call light using the speaker and addressed my now dead patient. Mrs. So-and-so, you have passed on, and this is no longer your room. The call light stopped ringing after that. For a brief period, I worked as a night audit at a hotel. I didn't work night audit long enough to have legit, creepy stories, but I did notice a lot of people who test you. These weird people will come up to you at 2 a.m. and they'll be like, do you have copy paper? They just ask for some mundane thing, like they had to think of a reason to go to the desk and interact with you. I worried that these people were testing me, and possibly scoping the building. Most of the night, I just sat in the back office, watching the cameras. Used to work night shift flight line services for a contractor in Afghanistan. Never got used to all the big black CH-67s heading out at night and coming back with the guys inside dragging big cloth bags behind them across the tarmac. The bags were always struggling.
Delivery driver. I was out delivering my last order of the night, about 2 a.m. in the morning. I typically leave my car running while I run up to the house or apartment. This apartment was rather hard to find, so it took me almost 4 minutes to get back to my car. As I walked around the corner of the apartment, I noticed someone standing right next to my driver's side door. Staring straight at the window, he wasn't moving. I held back for a second, and then slowly walked up to the car and shouted, "Hey, what are you doing, man?" He didn't say a word or move. I was at this point about to throw up in suspense. As I walked closer, the man looked straight at me, grinned, and walked away. Not one word. Worked night shift security at a cloth mill that's been around since the American Civil War. Had a good few spooks while I was there, but two really stand out. First, around 5 a.m. on a Saturday, I was patrolling the bridge that goes out over the river, and as I was going to unlock the gate to the bridge, I totally froze. I felt an incredible unnatural presence and looked forward to seeing, underneath a dim light, some kind of distortion in the air. You know cloaking devices in movies where the car or ship or whatever phases out and looks like a mirror of what's behind it? Exactly like that, but with some kind of blackened aura around it. I waited a moment, staring at it. It slowly undid itself and I began to calm down. I went about with my rounds, trying not to think about whatever it was. The second one happened about 2 weeks after. I was walking through the cotton opening room, and I was overcome with that same feeling that something unnatural or malevolent was nearby. I looked ahead and saw a small tuft of cotton floating in the air. Cotton often floats about in there, but this tuft was dead still. I walked towards it, eyes locked, waiting for it to move. No circulating air at that time of night. I waved my hands above, below, and to both sides of it, and yet it still didn't move. It was totally frozen in place. I turned to walk away, took a few steps, and whipped my head back to it, and it was lying on the floor. I have no idea what could have kept it suspended like that. I worked as a night crew at a grocery store years ago. I took out the trash while wearing headphones. It was probably 10 bags or so. Spoils and trash from the bathrooms. I was tossing the second to last, drippy, heavy, and rotten, bag into the dumpster when I saw movement. A hand. Then his head popped up. This guy was hanging out in the dumpster and let me throw heavy, wet bags of bad meat, moldy fruit, and public bathroom trash on top of him. He scared the hell out of me, but later I felt really bad about it. Worked night shift at a hospital as a file clerk for radiology. I worked alone and one night a code blue was called for my floor and wing. I'm working by myself 1 minute and the next doctors and nurses are flooding in asking me where the patient is. Some glitches set off the alarm. Also, the basement file room was in the oldest part of the hospital, next to the morgue. I'd go weeks without seeing anyone at all, and then some night I'd walk out of the file room and be scared out of me by a body being brought in or out of the morgue. Currently on a night shift. We have some travelers who moved into our business park around 6 months ago. I'm the only guy in the office and we have a lot of equipment in here. I always shut all the blinds and just have the lights above my desk on. Basically, a week or two after these travelers moved onto our park I saw shadows passing the windows because there are street lamps outside and the office is dark. Anyway, I saw these shadows and I picked up my phone ready to call on call, the police, anyone who would save me if that got weird. Anyway, as I picked up the phone I got this weird feeling I was being watched, so I glanced over my shoulder and the blinds behind me were open. There was a guy standing with his hands cupped around the window so he could see in. I jumped out my skin. He just kept looking at me with the biggest, weirdest grin on his face. I pretended to start talking on my phone straight away, and he quickly disappeared. I got to work tonight for my first shift on my own and the travelers are back. I'm dreading something similar happens. I used to work at graveyards at a youth detention center. Had this big black guy working with me and he was scared of the dark, and so we would put him in the control room with all the camera screens. One night I'm reading a book and the blinds on the window next to me slowly start rolling down, just slow, like, deliberately slow. Anyway, this kind of freaked me out, but I'm a pretty logical guy so I brushed it off and tried to just focus on my book and when I'm about to do my next check. We have to do checks on the kids every 15 minutes to make sure that the kids haven't hung themselves or tried to break out or something along that line. About 5 minutes after the window blind incident I'm about to get up and go do my check when my radio turns on and a woman yells jump. Which of course, made me jump. We didn't have a woman on duty and our radios are protected from strange radios nearby, or so they told me. Then I thought that maybe my big black coworker was trying to mess with me. When I confronted him about it he told me that he didn't think those kinds of jokes were funny, because he's afraid of the dark, and he would never do that. The guy almost had tears in his eyes, he was more freaked out than I was. But I was still freaked out, so I spent the rest of the night in control room with my big black friend and would walk all the way to the other side of the facility to do my checks, because I didn't want to be in that room alone again. I've worked overnight at a cage-free dog facility. They needed me to sleep over when they had dogs with medical needs that need to be monitored in a room overnight during the holidays. It was a big room in the middle of the building, so there were no windows. There was a queen-size bed for me to hang out on / keep some pups up with me on while I read and watch them. Like I said, it's cage-free dog boarding, so it's actually a pretty great deal. I get to hang out with and monitor a bunch of big, older dogs all night while I get some work done on my laptop. Now you know that stupid thing dogs do when they wake you up, barking at some random noise that, to you, appears to be the dark corner of the room or your open bedroom door? Imagine that and multiply it by 15. Same spot in the room, too. Every single one of them. Some of them even had their hackles up. Barking directly at the foot of the bed. Context first, skip down for creepy. Context: I worked jams, janitorial and maintenance services, for a local YMCA when I was in college. It was a brand new facility, everything was modern and technological, all lights were motion activated to conserve energy, every hallway had excellent camera security with audio, with a control room of sorts, nicknamed the Cave, that fed all of the streams to a couple monitors and housed the building's servers and sound systems. Every year, we would have a week-long shutdown, which basically entailed all hands on deck to deep clean the entire facility. We do stupid things to keep morale up, at some point while bleaching pool grates in large 50-gallon trash cans, for example, I had to get naked to dump out the bleach water so as to not ruin my clothes. My best friend would set up ridiculous games she would invent in the gym with all the cool equipment they've got. Most importantly, we'd all get buzzed on energy drinks and we were allowed to drink alcohol if we wanted to, so long as we weren't handling heavy equipment or highly toxic chemicals, so basically when we were doing mundane duties like mopping or scrubbing grout. These shifts sometimes lasted 18 to 20 hours because we were all broke and needed money, and it was kind of fun in between all the bitching and moaning from the stupid tasks we were given repeatedly. One night, we finished the pools and moved on to offices. There isn't much technical to do in the offices, mostly just scrubbing walls, extracting the carpets, and dusting machines. As such, we designated it a chill night and brought some beer to keep the party going. All doors were propped open, including the cave door. It's well into the night and our boss ordered us pizza, so everyone is taking a break sitting in the public area in the office, cleared out for carpet extraction. Creepy, I hear my best friend go nope. And so, we follow her eyes to the cave, and the security camera screens are flashing brighter one by one. We realize we're watching a Zamboni tile scrubber drive itself up the hall and crash right into the racquetball court glass wall. That's not the creepy part because you've operated a Zamboni, you know that weighs almost a ton, and therefore when it's switched on, it has powered wheels to assist in pushing the monster around. We're all absolutely dreading having to clean up the resulting mess of glass, and not so subtly making plans to murder the idiot that left it on. That's when it gets creepy. Remember how I mentioned our super fancy camera system had audio recording? A voice whispers over the monitor, "I'm sorry, no voice," we immediately recognize. And then we realize that we're all here in the office on the opposite side of the building. Every one of us. And we have been for almost an hour. And we had finished the pool deck already, there was no reason to have the Zamboni out since closing up the night before. And we designated that night as an alcohol night, and everyone promised not to touch heavy equipment. If this was one of our own legit, whoever left the Zamboni on never confessed, and we were a tight-knit group, and word usually got around eventually. Our Zamboni at work was plowed into a glass wall, and a ghost apologized for the mess. I work in an ICU. When there's a code blue in the unit, it automatically goes through to our pagers as soon as someone in the room hits the big emergency button on the wall. Middle of the night, we get 3 code blue calls to room 117 within a span of 20 minutes. We don't have room 117. It's not that room 117 isn't a patient room, there isn't room 117. Period. Not even on the building blueprints. It simply doesn't exist. Never found out what caused it, and it never happened again. Back in the summer of 2014 when I first got hired, I had closing shifts all the time. I worked at a theme park and would clock out 2 hours after all the guests and 95% of the in-park employees had gone home. In this particular park, there is an upper and lower lot, and the only way to access one or the other is a long escalator ride comprising of 4 escalators. Typically, they play music, but during this time all the speakers are off. Cue me, 19-year-old at my first job heading back up to the upper lot in silence, all alone on that long empty escalator. And then a loud, inhuman screeching off to the side, where the trail for the tram tour ran. I was scared and ran up the rest of the way. And that's when I learned that the park had a family of raccoons, and also that raccoons sound like demons. I was working on a mine site that was shut down from production because the resource we were mining dropped steeply in price. On night shift, there were 2 blokes in the plant, a guy running the powerhouse, all about 1 kilometer away, and me, security/medic, and the only lady, of course, all alone in the gatehouse. The site itself was about 1.5 hours from civilization, and even when I was on day shift, it gave me the heebie-jeebies. There was no toilet in my office/gatehouse/medical center, so I would have to walk across to the adjacent administration building, turn all the lights on and walk all the way through it to use the ladies. I had worked in this field for a while at this point, at many different sites, and I had never been worried or frightened before, even when wandering around at night on my own. My desk has a window which has a direct view down the access road to site, and as I'm sitting on my computer, I see movement out of the corner of my eye. There is a man walking down the access road toward the gatehouse, at 3 a.m. My spidey sense is screaming at me, but I don't falter. I email the powerhouse and advise I have someone at the gate and can they call in and check on me in 5 minutes and open the service window to talk to my visitor. As he gets about 20 meters from the gatehouse he vanishes. I wet my pants. I lock all the things and call the plant asking one of the guys to come over but not telling him why. He arrives and can clearly see I have shaken. I tell him what I have just seen. Oh, that's just Dave. Dave? Who is Dave? He is that Viking bloke that died in the crib room. Didn't anyone tell you the story? Well, no they hadn't, and assuming he was just trying to freak me out, I conducted a little Google investigation, and sure enough a man was shot nearby and was brought by his friends to site for help. He died in the crib room. For the uninitiated, the crib room is the lunchroom. So now I don't pee for my whole 12-hour shift obviously and close all the blinds. On my next swing, this was a fly-in fly-out job. I come in on day shift and I am doing the rosters. The night shift medic tells me directly, "Don't ever put me on nights here again, I refuse to do them." He wouldn't tell me why. It's okay mate, I saw him too, just shut the blinds from now on.
Not exactly night shift, but I worked at a 24-hour CVS, and it was 3 a.m.-ish, and I was very visibly pregnant at the time. The only other employee there was my manager, and he was in his office that overlooks the floor. A man comes in and asks where bandages are, but insists that I show him instead of just instructing him. They're in the back of the store, and when I get there, he thanks me but corners me, blocks me from leaving, and said, "I find pregnant women to be so hot," and I was immediately freaked out, but my manager was nowhere to be seen, so I just pushed past him. The man leaves, and is really angry, and when I told my manager what happened, he just shrugged it off. I work starting 3 a.m. at my job in a warehouse-type store. The creepiest thing I dealt with was being a few minutes late for work and needing to walk from the far end of the pitch-black parking lot to the door and wait to be let in. That was until I volunteered to do an overnight to watch the store when our security system was broken. The night started off with me coming in right before the store closed for the night. I got settled into the assembly area and started putting grills together. My manager said she was staying at the front end of the store for the night, so I knew I would be in the back alone. Our lights in the back are set up with motion sensors, so after an hour or something all of the lights went out. I was in a covered area that has its own light, so I paid no mind and continued working. Sometime later, all of the lights came back on. I assumed it was my manager walking back, so I sat and waited for a few minutes for her to make her way back to where I was. Nothing. I listened to see if I could hear footsteps. Nothing. So here I am at the furthest point from the front door, and our security system isn't working, and only one other woman in the store with me. My mind started spinning. I thought someone broke in, and they are going to find me alone in the back. This is how my life ends. After a minute, I gathered the courage to come out and walk toward the entrance from the store to the back end. As I stood there scanning the room and listening to someone, my manager comes walking in. I told her what happened, and she told me that was the first time she came back all night. It definitely creeped me out. I decided I had enough of assembly for the night and moved on to scanning products on the shelves. Now parts of the store have some light and others have almost none. I got to the section that had very little light and continued scanning, still on edge from earlier. As I was walking down the aisle, I kept hearing a sort of tapping metal, and then I heard flapping wings. Like when a bird flies off. I realized then that it was probably one of the many birds we have flying all over the store that set the light sensor off. Not dangerous, but definitely creepy being in a dim, empty warehouse overnight. My husband used to do overnight security for a bank. If someone messed with any of the doors from the outside, a signal would go off in the patrol truck, but regardless, every hour he'd have to walk the perimeter of the building. A few times he came across one of the back doors open just a few inches. The signals didn't go off, and it was especially bizarre, because that particular door only opened from the inside. He'd report it, higher-ups and local PD would come check it out, and they could never figure out how the door was opening. Happened about 5 or 6 times in the time he worked there. I was a night worker for 13 years in nursing homes. As you may have guessed, there's some strange happening at night in the nursing homes. One night, I was asked by a blind resident if I saw a guy dressed in white looking for his roommate. I said I hadn't. He continued saying that he told him that his roommate was in the smoking room, as per the usual for him. On the next rounds, we went down to the smoking room to find him dead. I guess the man in white, spotted by the blind guy, found who he was looking for that night. That's only the beginning. There was so much more beyond that story. Some things that make my hair stand on end. A few years ago, I worked night shift at a hotel. It wasn't super fancy, but it wasn't a seedy motel or anything either, and it was in a decent area of town. It was geared for extended stay guests, who were mostly there for work. There were not a lot of late arrivals, so it was a pretty nice gig. I got paid to just kick it in the back room and browse Reddit until the sun came up, which is what I was doing with my nights anyway. After midnight, we locked the front doors. If someone sounded the buzzer, I could open the doors manually to let them in. One night, at about 1 in the morning, a young woman ran up and began pounding on the front doors. She was screaming at the top of her lungs. "Please help me. Open the doors. Please don't let them get me." Shit like that. So, I opened the doors for her and grabbed the phone and punched in 911. She sprinted in, and I just watched the doors close behind her. Agonizingly slow, positive that her attackers would slip in before the automatic doors closed and locked again. But no one came. She kept babbling, telling me to call the police, please, you can't let them get me. She kept telling them, which freaked me out more than anything. I was already calling the police, of course, and I told her as much, but this didn't seem to calm her down. I informed the police of the situation, and they immediately asked me if she had gotten out of a specific taxi. I can't remember the cab company name. I didn't know if she had or not, so they said they were sending some officers over. After I got off the phone, she was a little calmer, but she kept looking frantically around the lobby. I tried to assure her that everything would be fine, but it didn't seem like she heard a word I said. She started to wander off down the hall, so I followed her. She went into our large conference/breakfast room, where she backed herself up into a corner, now staring directly at me with increasing terror. I kept telling her everything was all right, and I did not approach her. I just wanted to keep her in my sight, but I had no desire to get close to her. I tried asking her what had happened, but she would not respond. She just kept telling me I had to help her, and that she was afraid they would get her. I told her it was okay, that I had called the police. She looked horrified at that and asked me why I had called the police officers on her. I explained I had called the police officers for her, not on her, and that the police would be there to help keep her safe. To which she responded, "Don't touch me." I was roughly 50 feet away from her, and had not moved at all. It was about then that my fear started to ease up, because I realized there probably wasn't a them after all, and this girl was simply having some sort of mental break, probably drug-related. The police officers arrived shortly after, and rather than being relieved, she was scared of them and was reluctant to speak. They sat her in a chair in the lobby, and tried to ask her name, but she just drew her knees up to her chest and started hyperventilating. Then she got up and speed-walked down the hall. Cops ended up escorting her out of the building. She wasn't struggling or screaming, but she definitely seemed distraught and confused. When it was all said and done, I reviewed the security footage from outside the hotel, and it looked like she had been in a cab on the road next to the hotel. Then she had bailed out of it when it slowed down for the stoplight, and she had come running immediately to our front door, screaming. At no point was she pursued by anyone or anything. From what the police told me, the cab driver called the police officers before I did, since she had skipped out on the fare. I never knew what happened to her after that. I didn't see her on the arrest reports, so I don't think they charged her with anything, and I hope they were able to get her somewhere safe. The woman, probably on drugs, came to my hotel screaming for help against non-existent attackers. I work at a transitional living home for young women recovering from addictions, and I used to do quite a few night shifts. This is an incredibly old house, and there was a story about a ghost named Charlotte who lived there. One night I was looking for a binder on the shelves in the office, but it wasn't there. This was strange because the binders are rarely anywhere else. All the girls were sleeping, the office is always locked, and we are single-staffed on night shifts. I went downstairs for a bit to look for the binder and at some point went back to the office. The damn binder was back on the shelf. And then the paper shredder just started going off. I noped right the F out of the office for the rest of my shift. I had a palliative patient, comfort care only, no chance of recovery, one night. I visited her around 8 p.m., gave her medication, and went to attend to another patient. About 20 minutes later a nurse's aide and I went in to turn her and see if she needed anything. When I walked into the room, I could tell something was wrong. The room was dark, she had been trying to sleep. I could see black lines streaming from the corners of her mouth. We turned on the light. Black vomit had spewed from her mouth, trickling down the corners and soaking the front of her Johnny. She had pulled her sheet aside, and I could see she had also defecated in the sheets. Her glassy eyes were open, staring straight ahead at the mirror above the sink across from the foot of the bed. She was still, and her face was gray like ash. All you could smell in the room was feces. Just then, her jaw spasmed, and a foul bubble of blackness plopped out of her mouth. I looked at the nurse's aide in horror. I had never found a patient like this. I rushed to get the other nurses, who came into the room. It was just a body spasm, and she was already gone when we walked in there, they assured me. The black vomit was due to bile and fecal matter, and it was likely something inside her had burst. It was creepy getting her cleaned up for her family. ATM, I work at a cold storage facility, doing clerical work. We have 2 facilities, connected through an outside bridge, over a canal. At night, sometimes, I have to walk over said bridge, to go into the next building. Usually at night, all the workers go into the east building, thus leaving the west building alone. We have motion-activated lights that turn on when you're walking the facility. So, when you go into a room it's pitch black and as you walk through the warehouse, the lights go on. They stay on for about 5 minutes after that. Well, one night I went over to the west building to get some paper in the racks. All the way to the back of the building. It's cold in the building, think of meat and milk storage. If you were to fall and not be able to get up and you didn't have the proper equipment, you'd be found dead. So, I go into the west building knowing that nobody is there, all of a sudden the lights start turning on. As if someone were walking towards me, so I had a moment, what do I do? Edit, I got out there and ran like a little girl. Said, let the day shift clerk deal with it. Some of the workers say weird things happen when they're alone in room 7 or 6. One time I was talking to one of the guys, and the racks just started creaking, as if something were about to break, then we heard a gush of water, coming from up top. We looked around and there was no water to be found. I work at a homeless shelter. Walking through the dorms conducting a head count one night a few months ago. Routine. I've worked there for years at this point. I got into the men's area, which at the time was a giant wide open room with like 3 people sleeping in it. It was about 12:45 a.m. at this point and I'd already conducted a count with someone else, but they had left, and it was just me. As I'm walking through the dorm, I hear a little girl's voice say very playfully, "Hi." I stopped dead in my tracks as the voice came from behind me. I then had decisions to make. Either continue on quickly and walk out of the dorms back downstairs or look around. I opted to look around because if anyone is in the dorm, that shouldn't be they needed to leave. We only house 18 plus, but regardless it was my job. I very slowly turned around, my flashlight barely lit anything up. After making a complete spin and seeing nothing, I promptly booked it downstairs. I've had a couple other things happen there as well. Generally, these things happen to me when I'm just expecting a regular night with nothing going on. Not scared. Not nervous. Just doing my usual thing, and then bam. Suddenly weird stuff. Overall, though for almost 4 years at the job I haven't run into a vast number of things.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.